But I am excited to chat with you and hear your input. Like they said, my name is Julia. I live in South Como on Kilburn, kind of off of Front and near Halftime Rec area. I was also involved in the St. Pollinators with Jessica, so she can also jump in here as well. My background is that I have a PhD from the University of Minnesota in entomology, where I was studying bees and prairie restoration ecology. And now I work for the Xerces Society, which is an international nonprofit focused on invertebrate conservation. And I'm supporting this grant both as a community member and also in my capacity as a Xerces staff member. But today I'm just going to be sharing about my role at Xerces for this project. So this is actually the garden that's over at the Orchard Rec Center, and a little selfie of us with this queen bumblebee last fall. Um, so for today, I'm just going to talk about like what the role of Xerces is, give a little background on what I'll be doing, and then I'm going to turn it over to you all because I'm really here to learn and hear from you. So the grant has a lot of different pieces to it, and Xerces' role is to support two small pieces. One is pollinator monitoring, and one is heavy metal sampling. So why are we doing pollinator monitoring? This is really important because we want to understand how all of the gardening and habitat plantings that folks in our neighborhood and across these three neighborhoods have been impacting different pollinator species. So this could be the number of insect visitors to different plants or the diversity, the numbers of different species that might be visiting a given garden or planting. We also live in the range of endangered and like super rare species, surprisingly, even though we're in a city in a metro area. And it's really helpful to know like how our gardens support these rare, and in some cases declining species. So that's the rusty patch bumblebee, if anybody's ever heard of that. That's a federally endangered species. I found it in my backyard randomly. And then last year I also found the American bumblebee in my yard, which is a very rare species. I almost didn't believe it when I saw it. I had to get it confirmed by a taxonomist. And what's really fun about pollinator monitoring is you don't have to be an expert. You just have to go out in your gardens, see what you see on the plants. And so it can be done in a really fun, community engaged way with kids and families. So I would just love to know if that's something that folks here would be really interested in. So that's one piece is the pollinator monitoring. And then we also wrote into the grant some funding to do some heavy metal sampling. So why would we do heavy metal sampling? What does that have to do with pollinators? Bees, just like people and other, insects can be impacted by heavy metal pollutants. They can impact colony health. They can impact a bee's ability to reproduce. It can impact a bee's ability to like smell and sense their surroundings. They can be exposed in a lot of different ways, from, eating the plants. So some butterflies, their larvae, they, lay their eggs on a plant and they need that plant for their caterpillars to eat and survive. Some bees nest underground, so they're interacting with the soil quite a bit. It would be like inside of our house, like the walls of all of our house. Or of course, in their foraging, like the nectar and pollen that they eat, plants can take up metals from the soil, or metals can be deposited on the tops of the plants, from the air or from dust or things like that. We know that all organisms need metals for nutritional requirements, but bees can't always tell when it's toxic. And metals don't biodegrade like, pesticides or other types of contaminants. They really kind of stay in the soil and can accumulate. So a little bit more about the grant. I'm funded for about like 30 days, 30 to 40 days, depending on the timing and the hours, for about 2 years. And we can test for about 20 to 40 samples, depending on what communities want to test for. So I'm chatting with folks at Hamlin Midway about this question I presented to them 2 months ago. Also chatting with folks in Frogtown. So trying to sort of sample across the different neighborhoods. And that can be between 20 and 40. They're getting tested at the University of Minnesota Analytical Lab. Some might end up getting sent to a lab in Chicago area. Um, They do have to be in the pollinator habitat, but that can be broadly defined. And they don't have to be in habitats that are funded by this grant. So that, can be really helpful. And my goal, of course, is to communicate with community, share the data with you with your consent, share the data publicly, just so you can use it and use it to inform, your projects. And a lot of questions might come up like, well, what are we supposed to do with this information? Like, why? That's just going to make me scared. It's going to make me scared to garden. Or like, what if we find things that are kind of concerning? Part of this is trying to test a hypothesis that native plantings and native gardens can actually take pollutants that might be at the soil surface and kind of pull them down deeper into the soil so that it's kind of like makes it less toxic. And so that's this is the Jameson front planting, which is also trying to test some experimental designs around how do we kind of make metals less bioavailable in the soil? How do we sort of pull them away from the soil surface? And so that's kind of the hope, or to better understand that. How do we do pollinator habitat in an urban area where there are pollutants? How do we do it safely? Because you don't want to be planting a garden that's just going to be maybe kind of poisonous to pollinators. But we do need more information and data. So now I'm going to turn it over to you for any questions or thoughts. Like, you all know your neighborhoods the best. This is just the initial conversation. I can't promise that I'm going to be able to like do everything that everybody asks for, but yeah, I'm just curious, like what ideas you have, what thoughts do you have, what questions come up, what concerns come up. And it could also be like, this is also about consent. Like if folks here are like, I'm super uncomfortable, please do not test anything in my neighborhood. Okay, that's totally okay. So I just kind of want to get, a vibe check, and just want to do the sampling in a really intentional and thoughtful way. So just kind of want to, yeah, get your thoughts. And I'll turn it over to everybody from here.
Yeah, I had a question. Maybe
thank you, Julia. And if we can, folks can just raise their hands, Matt. And
sorry, I jumped the gun.
Yeah, go ahead.
No, maybe not so much about the testing, because I think personally, I'm trying to do a wildflower native garden, and I would love people to sample, but I know that there is, I think at least one, maybe two honey producers in our neighborhood that have beehives. I don't know if you've done any work to try to reach out to see if you can talk to people who are kind of trying to have a bee population within the Como neighborhood when you're doing some of this testing or some of your research. Because I know there's at least one, and I think two, that have their pollinator zone would cover most of Como.
Yeah, that's a great option. So there's honeybees and they live in a hive that like we can manage and all of that. And then there's wild bees that live underground and they're exposed to the environments in all these different ways. But there are really great research opportunities where, because honeybees are such like great little comrades, they're like collecting pollen from like all these different sources in our neighborhood. You can test the pollen that comes into a hive to see like what is the heavy metal profile. So that would be great. If anybody has connections or personal relationships with those beekeepers, I'd love a connect for sure.
Go ahead, Lauren.
Are we testing that super polluted space that's over off of Front and Jameson?
I would like to. I know that I've chatted with university researchers who are also involved at that site, and I'm trying to make sure that I'm not testing in the same places that they're testing because they're already testing there.
Nice.
So they have done soil testing there. I chatted with them a week or so ago and they plan to test there again. So that site is like an active site of concern, where there will be soil testing for sure. But if I know that they're only doing soil, and so if folks were like, well, I really am nervous about testing the vegetation, maybe we could do that as a supplement to what the university folks are doing. So.
Can I go?
Yeah, go ahead, Aggie.
Um, I am wondering if we are aware of specific places in Como where there might, or the other two neighborhoods, where there might be a lot of lead pollution, or like we know where the homes were, you know, painted with lead, and also there's the smelting or the, in the, I can't remember the name of the place where they do the do you know what I'm talking about, Julia?
Are you talking about the foundry?
The foundry, right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So, like, are there specific places where you're looking that you're kind of aware of these?
Yeah, definitely aware of the foundry. So
Yeah.
I would like to work with Frogtown folks and like figure out, where would be an ideal place to, because yeah, part of the goal is like, understanding and doing a scientific analysis of where heavy metals might be in the neighborhood and how gardens influence them, but also like these are your neighborhoods. It doesn't have to be some kind of scientific study. Like if you're nervous about this spot right here, like let's do it. It's expensive to get this stuff tested. So, I'm open to yeah, whatever would work. And if you know of places like, oh, I know about the foundry or Jameson Front, or oh, I know this one particular house is super old and probably has lead paint. Yeah, that's really helpful to know.
Go ahead, Dan.
So in terms of what you're testing for, I'm just kind of thinking out loud. Say you tested on someone's private property. They said, yeah, go ahead and test my yard. I'm interested. And then you find some stuff, does it now then go on their record? Will it be an issue then for them trying to sell their property in the future? Where maybe it wouldn't have been otherwise, but now it's been identified that, yeah, you've got this gunk here that you didn't even know about. Is there a potential for that?
That's a great question. I don't know if there's anything that would like trigger some kind of regulatory response. Like I'm not under any um I'm not aware of anything where like, oh, if we find a value that's like super high, we have to like report it. So that's a great question. I don't know. But again, this is where data sharing is like, I'm not going to share people's information without their consent. And so that if somebody like, we did happen to find tons of heavy metals and they were like, please don't share this with the public, I'm not going to. So, I'm sorry that doesn't totally answer your question, but I made a note to like look into it. I'm not sure.
Thank you.
I think I'm gonna just dovetail on that. In the chat, Marnie asked, are you looking into testing in private yards? Like, is there kind of a preference for like bigger public spaces as opposed to private yards?
Nope, open to wherever. It would be nice to like some conversations we had at Hamlin Midway were like, oh, like would there be a way to sort of compare something? So if there's a private yard with like a pollinator garden that's 20 years old, we could compare that to a pollinator garden that's nearby that's only a couple years old, right? So if folks are interested in that, then yeah, doesn't have to be on public land. And I think part of the like because of South Como, like we've done a lot of pollinator planting through the grant already. There's kind of like already lots of gardens available, and those are all on boulevards, but some are also in private land. So it doesn't, yeah, not exclusive to public spaces.
Thanks. Shevik, go ahead.
I imagine you're already aware of Patricia Ullman and Frogtown Green's spaces right near the foundry. I am curious if you're planning on connecting with the city about testing specifically in Como Park, different areas of the park, maybe sports fields could be places to try. I imagine the city or CAP region does regular testing on some things, or if they're doing development or something, but there may be some places of the park that haven't been touched in many decades that I don't know.
Yeah, that's a great idea. Definitely to see where they've already tested, maybe, and have a sense of if there's a database of information available. Even the county does a lot of this kind of stuff too. So yeah, great idea.
Questions over in the streetcar station?
I was gonna kind of clarify that the 3 neighborhoods that are covered under this, I don't know if you said it out loud, are Frogtown, Hamlin Midway, and then South Como. And this time around, South Como is a little more vaguely, we didn't put borders on our grant this time. So South Como area, I guess, would be the best way to say. So if things come up, even if you're seeing things in Frogtown or in some of the other neighborhoods, I know Julia is connecting with all of those, but those are the 3 neighborhoods covered under this grant.
Awesome. Yeah, I don't think I quite said that, so thank you, Jessica. One thought that I'd love to run by you all is I was talking to somebody from Frogtown Green actually, and they were like, "Oh, have you thought about testing like larval host plants?" And so if folks don't know what that is, that's some caterpillars of butterflies will only eat certain plants. The milkweed is the famous one, right? Because butterfly caterpillars will only eat milkweed, but other butterflies and moths also have preferred host plants. And so that was something I was like, oh, that could be really intriguing. Like, is there a plant that is commonly grown where I could collect some leaves and have them go in for testing, and we could understand, you know, how, if there might be like heavy metal contamination on certain important host plants. So that was something I was chewing on. I'm curious what folks think about that.
I mean, I think you'd find takers. You know, when I hear you say like, well, what I can hear is a lot of respect for the neighborhood and for the neighbors, you know, making sure that people don't feel like this is something that's happening to them, it's something that's happening with them. Which thank you, obviously. But I think that there's you know, in my community interactions here, I just say like, I think that this is an area where people tend to like to participate in things like this, like they like that opportunity for more information, and people tend to, I mean, I think you probably have more people who would volunteer their spaces than you would have slots for testing, if that was something we put out. So to some extent, I almost think like you might, if we put out a call for something like this, you might get to kind of go through and pick the sites that you think are the most helpful, or you know, the types of plants that are the most, that are going to give you the best information or something like that. So I appreciate the care that you're approaching it with. And if there's one thing Como does pretty well, it's like show up for these types of things. The one question that I was going to add is just looking at the map that you put up at the very beginning there, you know, the prominence of the railroad running kind of through and along all those neighborhoods. And I was just wondering if there's any like soil testing that happens with proximity to the railway anyway, or if that factors in at all to how you do, like where you would like to do the testing.
Yeah, I was wondering if the railroad would come out this meeting. I'm curious about it, for sure. Yeah, definitely anything adjacent to roadways, like anytime a car is like pressing its brakes, it's, you know, releasing potential heavy metals. So I'd be curious, high traffic areas where people like near stop signs or stoplights or things like that, certainly the railroad. So yeah, that would be of an interest.
I think one more thing I want, oh, go ahead, Matt.
No, I was gonna say, and it's not just the, you know, rail yards to the south of Energy Park. It's having the 2 lines that run directly through the middle of the neighborhood as well by the lake. So I'd be interested in that too, because I know that those railway lines impact the community a lot. So this is, if there's more that we could be doing to collecting like environmental impacts and stuff on that, I'd be interested as well.
And Como's kind of bound, like South Como is bound on both sides by by tracks there, so it's not insignificant.
I was gonna say too, one thing that we talked about before we actually got the grant, so I don't know how much this is still happening, but in talking about pollinator monitoring, like you had talked about like the potential of, you know, community members being able to get involved, whether that's through an app or through something where they can actually like maybe sign up their garden and they can spend X amount of time every week just standing there watching for pollinators, which I think sounds like a mindfulness activity to anybody. But to be able to report back, is that something that seems still feasible if people are interested in doing that?
Yeah, I mean, I would love that it can look like that. Somebody at Hamlin Midway was like, let's do a big pollinator day at this community garden. And I was like, great, you know, like it can be concentrated on certain areas or it can be sort of like dispersed. I definitely will be looking at iNaturalist records for sure. I think certainly Jessica probably feels this way too. It would be really nice to do monitoring on the gardens put in by the Lawns to Legumes. And we're in such a great position because many of those gardens are like really coming into their own, like they're in their second, third year when these gardens just really pop. So there'll be lots of bugs. And I know the board, part of what made our application competitive, in addition to like all of these amazing groups be involved, is that Bowser was probably like, oh wow, they're gonna look at like the impact of the money that they spend on these plantings in these neighborhoods. So I would love that. That's a great idea, Jessica. So yeah, let's do it.
Are there other questions out there for Julia? All right.
I know this was probably a lot. I will put my email and my phone number in the chat. You can email me or call me or text me if an idea comes. I know this was like tons of information. I also live close by. You're welcome to just like swing by, knock on the door. I'm at 1009, so I'll put my address in here too. So yeah, love to hear from you. And I always get really nervous at meetings, so I totally understand if like people didn't want to speak up because there's a lot of people here. So yeah, feel free to reach out anytime.
Thank you so much, Julia. We appreciate your time tonight.